It usually starts late at night. You're not even planning to buy a house right now. You're just scrolling, just looking, and somehow every house that doesn't look abandoned costs $500,000. The kitchen feels dated. The carpet is beige in that depressing way. The basement has fake wood paneling that smells like the early 2000s. And the listing calls it *starter home*. That's the moment something inside you tightens. Because you're not irresponsible. You work. You pay your bills. You've done what you were told you were supposed to do. So why does this feel so impossible? You start doing the math in your head. Your income, your savings, your monthly expenses. And for a second, you wonder if you missed something. Maybe everyone else got a raise you didn't. Maybe there was a promotion you forgot to apply for. Maybe adulthood came with a secret level you never unlocked. Because according to the market, this is normal. This is what people are expected to afford. And if you can't, the unspoken message is clear. Something must be wrong with *you*. But here's the uncomfortable truth. It's not you. It's not your discipline. It's not your budgeting skills. It's the math. And the math is brutal. What makes this especially confusing is that the system keeps telling you you're fine. A bank might approve you. A mortgage broker might smile and say, you're good to go. A real estate agent might tell you, this is just how it is now. So you're stuck between two realities. One where professionals are saying you can afford it, and another where your stomach drops every time you imagine actually living with that payment. That gap is where anxiety lives. Because deep down, you're not asking, can I get approved? You're asking something much more honest. Will this house make my life better? Or will it quietly take it over? Most people never stop to separate those two questions. They assume approval equals affordability. They assume that if the door is open, walking through it must be safe. But those are two completely different calculations. And confusing them is how people end up feeling trapped in lives that look successful from the outside and feel suffocating on the inside. What's happening right now in the housing market messes with your head in very specific ways? You're told that renting is throwing money away, that if you don't buy now, you'll be priced out forever, that real adults own homes. So when you struggle to see how a $500,000 house fits into your life, the shame creeps in quietly. You don't say it out loud, but you feel it. Why can't I make this work? Why does everyone else seem to manage? Why does this feel so hard? And because no one around you is talking honestly about the numbers, you assume the problem must be personal. That's the trap. This video isn't about doom. It's not about telling you to give up. And it's definitely not about shaming anyone who owns a home. It's about slowing everything down, stripping away the noise, the pressure, the cultural expectations, and asking one simple, grounding question: house in 2026? Without turning their life into a constant stress test? Not who can technically sign the paperwork, not who can survive the first few months, but who can live in that house and still breathe, still save, still sleep, still feel like one unexpected expense won't knock everything over. It's how normalized the stress has become. We've quietly accepted that feeling stretched, anxious, and one bill away from panic is just part of adulthood. We joke about it. We bond over it. We tell ourselves it's temporary. But years pass, and temporary turns into permanent tension. They're coping. They're managing spreadsheets instead of living their lives. They're delaying joy. They're postponing peace. And from the outside, it all looks fine. That's why this conversation matters. Because if you're feeling confused, overwhelmed, there's a reason for that. Your instincts are picking up on something the marketing doesn't want you to notice. This isn't about being pessimistic. It's about being honest. Over the next sections, we're going to walk through this slowly and calmly. Why the pressure to buy is so intense, and how to think about affordability in a way that protects your future instead of just your ego. No scare tactics, no lectures, just clarity. Because once you see the full picture, something interesting happens. The panic fades, the comparison loses its grip, and you stop asking, what's wrong with me? You start asking better questions. And those questions change everything. Let's talk about what this actually looks like in real life. Not the headlines, not the charts, just the day-to-day experience of trying to make sense of housing right now. You wake up, go to work, do your job reasonably well. It's not even intentional anymore. The apps remember you. You see a house pop up that looks decent, not amazing, just livable. Your first reaction isn't excitement, it's tension. Because before you even notice the layout or the yard, your brain jumps straight to one thing. What would this cost me every month? And you don't mean casually. You mean asterisk emotionally asterisk. You imagine your paycheck landing, then immediately disappearing. You imagine the feeling of checking your account after the payment clears. That quiet calculation you'd start doing before every other decision. Can we still afford this? Should we wait until next month? What if something goes wrong? That's the part nobody puts in the listing photos. On the surface, everything about buying a house is framed as progress. You're moving forward, leveling up, doing what adults do. But internally, for a lot of people, it feels like walking into a responsibility that never turns off. You're not scared of hard work. You're scared of asterisk permanent pressure asterisk. Because rent, as frustrating as it can be, has edges. It's predictable. It ends. A mortgage feels different. It follows you into every decision. Suddenly, your job isn't just a job. It's the thing that keeps the house from slipping away. Vacations become negotiations. Groceries become math problems. Small joys get filtered through a quiet voice asking, "Is this responsible?" And what makes it worse is how isolated this stress feels. No one posts about it. No one admits it openly. All you see are keys in hands, smiling photos, captions about being so grateful. So when you feel hesitation, it feels like weakness. But hesitation isn't weakness. It's awareness trying to break through noise. Most people don't talk about the emotional weight of a large, fixed monthly obligation. They talk about pride, stability, equity. They don't talk about lying awake at night replaying expenses, or the low-grade anxiety that hums in the background of everyday life. They don't talk about how quickly this is exciting can turn into this is heavy. And because those conversations aren't happening, a strange thing occurs. People assume their stress is unique. They assume everyone else has figured something out that they haven't. So they push themselves forward even when something inside says, "Slow down." Another part of the problem is timing. This decision doesn't come when life is simple. It comes when you're already juggling things. Careers that aren't perfectly stable, rising everyday costs, family responsibilities, health concerns you can't schedule neatly. You're not making this choice from a place of excess. You're making it from a place of already managing a lot, which means the margin matters more than ever. And still, the pressure keeps coming. Friends ask when you're going to buy. Family members talk about how renting is a waste. Articles warn you that prices will only go higher. Even the language around housing is loaded. Getting in before it's too late. Building something for yourself. Putting down roots. It makes waiting feel like failure. It makes caution feel like cowardice. So instead of asking, "Does this fit my life?" people ask, "How do I force this to work?" That's where the stress really begins. Because forcing something to work means squeezing everywhere else. You squeeze your spending. You squeeze your savings. You squeeze your flexibility. You tell yourself it's temporary. Once we adjust, it'll feel fine. Once we get raises, it'll be easier. Once this phase passes, we'll breathe again. But life doesn't usually loosen its grip all at once. Expenses don't line up politely. Emergencies don't wait for promotions. Energy doesn't magically increase just because you own something. And deep down, many people sense this. That's why the thought of buying doesn't just feel exciting. It feels heavy. It feels like choosing a path that narrows your options. And that's terrifying in a world that already feels uncertain. You might not even be able to articulate this clearly. You just know that when you imagine life after buying an expensive house, the image isn't peace. It's vigilance, watching balances, timing payments, hoping nothing unexpected happens. That constant state of readiness wears people down. Not dramatically, quietly. It shows up as irritability, as burnout, as the feeling that no matter how much you earn, it's never enough. And here's the most frustrating part. You can do everything right and still end up here. You can be careful, you can plan, you can be disciplined, and still feel like the ground is unstable beneath you. That's why so many people feel confused. They're not reckless, they're not uninformed, and instead of acknowledging that mismatch, the culture tells them to internalize it, to believe that if they just try harder, it will all click into place. But the discomfort you feel isn't a personal flaw. It's a signal that the expectations being placed on you don't line up with the reality of your life. Before we talk about numbers or rules or affordability frameworks, it's important to name this feeling honestly, because once you do, something shifts. You stop blaming yourself. You stop rushing to prove something. You give yourself permission to pause, and that pause is where clear thinking begins. Not financially yet, psychologically. Why smart people override their instincts. Why urgency feels so real. Because once you understand that, the fog starts to lift, and decisions get quieter. Before any numbers enter the picture, something else is already shaping your decision. Emotion. Not in a dramatic way. In a subtle, everyday way that feels logical while it's happening. Most people don't wake up one morning and decide to take on a massive financial obligation without thinking. They drift into it, one small assumption at a time. The first assumption is simple and powerful. If everyone else is doing this, it must be normal. Humans are wired to look around and take cues from the environment. It's how we stay safe. It's how we decide what's acceptable. So when you see coworkers buying homes, friends posting pictures, family members asking when it's your turn, your brain quietly updates the rulebook. This must be manageable. This must be reasonable. Otherwise, why would so many people do it? What your brain doesn't see is what's happening behind those doors. The stress, the trade-offs, the quiet calculations that never make it into conversation. You're seeing outcomes, not experiences, and your brain fills in the gaps with optimism. The second assumption is about identity. Home ownership isn't just framed as a financial step. It's framed as a character trait. Responsible people buy homes. Successful people buy homes. Adults buy homes. So when you hesitate, it doesn't feel like you're questioning a purchase. It feels like you're questioning who you are. Am I falling behind? Am I being too cautious? Am I failing some invisible test? That emotional weight pushes people to override their own comfort. They don't want to be the one who didn't make it. They don't want to explain themselves at family gatherings. They don't want to feel left out of a shared milestone. So they move forward even when their body is tense the entire time. Another powerful force is something that feels like urgency, but isn't. Scarcity. You're constantly told that if you don't act now, you'll miss your chance. Prices are rising. Rates could go up. Inventory is tight. Scarcity narrows your thinking. It makes you focus on the fear of loss instead of the reality of ownership. You're not asking, can I live comfortably with this payment for years? You're asking, what if I never get another chance? That question is incredibly persuasive. It turns a long-term decision into a short-term panic. And panic is very good at silencing doubt. There's also a deep, emotional promise attached to owning a home. Stability. The idea that once you buy, things settle down. That life becomes more grounded, more secure, more predictable. For many people, that promise comes from childhood. Maybe your parents owned a home and it felt like safety. Maybe renting felt temporary or uncertain. So buying a house becomes symbolic. It's not just a roof, it's proof that you've arrived. The problem is that symbols don't pay monthly bills. And when the symbol comes with a payment that stretches you too thin, the sense of stability it promises can flip into constant pressure. Instead of feeling grounded, you feel pinned. There's also the comparison trap. You rarely compare your full life to someone else's full life. You compare your behind the scenes to their highlight reel. You see the house. You don't see the credit card balances. You see the yard. You don't see the anxiety. So when someone else seems to make it work, your brain assumes you should too. If they can do it, why can't I? What that question ignores is context. Different incomes, different support systems, different risk tolerance. But psychology doesn't like nuance when emotions are involved. It prefers simple stories. They did it. I should do it. Another subtle pressure comes from authority. When a bank approves you, it feels like validation. They ran the numbers. They're professionals. They wouldn't say yes if it was unsafe. That assumption is deeply comforting. But banks aren't measuring comfort. They're measuring probability. Not whether you'll feel stressed. Not whether you'll build savings. Not whether you'll enjoy your life. Just whether you'll keep paying. Then there's the idea of sacrifice being virtuous. We're taught that hard things lead to good outcomes. That struggling now means success later. This is just part of it. Everyone struggles at first. It'll be worth it eventually. Sometimes that's true. But sometimes discomfort isn't a phase. It's a warning. And the hardest part is that both feel similar in the moment. So people push through. They ignore the tightness in their chest. They ignore the numbers that don't quite line up. They tell themselves they'll adapt. Humans are remarkably good at adapting to stress, which is both a strength and a trap, because adaptation can slowly normalize things that shouldn't be normal. Constant worrying, no margin, no room for mistakes. You don't notice it all at once. It becomes the background of your life. And because it happens gradually, you don't question it. You just assume this is what adulthood feels like. This is why conversations about affordability often feel confusing. They jump straight to math without addressing the emotional machinery, driving the decision. The numbers won't stick. You'll always find a way to justify stretching. Understanding this psychology doesn't mean you shouldn't buy a home. It means you should recognize when emotions are rushing you toward a decision that deserves patience. When you separate the desire for stability from the reality of the payment, clarity begins to emerge. And once that happens, you can finally look at the costs without flinching. In the next section, we'll start to do that gently, not as a scare tactic. At this point, nothing here should feel shocking anymore. Not because the situation is acceptable, but because, deep down, you've probably felt it all along. The tightness when you think about a mortgage payment that never takes a month off. The quiet fear of one bad year undoing a decade of effort. What this entire conversation comes down to is something very simple. Affordability is not about what you can survive. It's about what allows you to live. Somewhere along the way, those two ideas got dangerously mixed up. We started treating endurance as success. We started calling constant pressure normal. We started believing that if we could just hold on long enough, the stress would eventually fade. But for many people, it doesn't. It becomes the background noise of life. A house payment that dictates every decision. A job that can't be left even if it's draining. A sense that your future is already spoken for. And the most painful part is that none of this feels dramatic enough to justify walking away. You're not failing spectacularly. You're just stuck. That's why so many people stay quiet about it. From the outside, it looks like success. From the inside, it feels like constantly holding your breath. Not as a status symbol, not as a milestone, but as a structure that should support your life, not consume it. A home is supposed to be the place where your nervous system relaxes, where you feel grounded, where problems feel manageable. If owning that home creates the opposite effect, it's worth pausing. Not because you're weak, but because you're paying attention. There is no prize for stretching yourself to the limit. No medal for white-knuckling your way through 30 years of payments. No hidden reward for sacrificing peace in exchange for square footage. The culture might applaud the purchase, but culture doesn't show up when the roof leaks, or when your income dips, or when you lie awake at night wondering how fragile everything feels. That's your life carrying that weight, not the market. And here's a quiet truth that rarely gets said clearly. Choosing not to buy a house you can't comfortably afford is not a failure. It's restraint. It's maturity. It's a long-term decision made with self-respect. Renting while building savings is not throwing money away if it preserves your stability. Waiting is not losing. Sometimes waiting is opting out of a bad deal. The system benefits when you rush. It benefits when you equate approval with readiness. It benefits when you confuse social pressure with personal timing. But you don't have to play along. You are allowed to choose margin over maximums. Margin means breathing room. It means being able to handle surprises without panic. It means having energy left for things that don't show up on a balance sheet. For some people, that will still include buying a home. For others, it won't, at least not right now. Neither path says anything about your worth. The mistake is believing there's only one right answer. The real shift happens when you stop asking, "What will people think?" and start asking, "How will this actually feel to live with?" When you picture your future, try not to imagine the house. Imagine the rhythm of your days. Imagine whether you can rest, whether you can save, whether you can absorb a setback without everything cracking. That's the real measure of affordability. Not the size of the loan, not the price tag, but the presence of peace. If the numbers don't support that, walking away is not giving up. It's choosing yourself. So if you're feeling behind or pressured, or quietly relieved every time you don't buy, understand this. You're not broken. You're not irresponsible. You're not missing some secret. And there is nothing wrong with refusing to sacrifice your future just to keep up appearances. Sometimes the smartest move isn't buying in. It's stepping back, letting the noise pass, letting the pressure fade, and building a life that feels steady long before it looks impressive. That's not failure. That's clarity.